Yep. All right, great. All right. Well, welcome to the Regional Agreement Committee meeting of January 23rd, 2023. Welcome. This meeting is being recorded. I don't think we're being live broadcast, right? It is being recorded for later use and will be posted to W.H.R.S.D. As we start all of our meetings, if we can please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we will open it up for public comment if there is any. I see Mr. Galvin here, so feel free. You can just give us your name and address. And
yeah, sure. John Galvin, High Street, Whitman. I just wanted to make a brief comment on a topic that you guys discussed last meeting, which was the busing assessment discussion that you had. I thought that was a great meeting. I thought that your discussion on the assessing via the mileage method was a fantastic idea for 3 reasons. First reason, number one, obviously we know that using the mileage method for reimbursement is significantly improvement for all 3 parties in this district. Everybody wins with that. The fact that we're assessing it differently seems kind of crazy that we reimburse it one way and then we assess it a different way. I would think honestly that DESI might even have a problem with that, but I'm not sure that they do. But it would just make sense for, if we're going to reimburse it via the mileage method, we should assess it via the mileage method. Secondly, I think it would be easier for the administration, meaning Mr. Stanbrook, to actually assess it the same way that we reimburse it, because you will no longer have to break out non-mandated versus mandated in the assessment method. It would just be all miles. So it wouldn't matter if it's a mandated mile or a non-mandated mile. If it's a Whitman mile, it gets charged to Whitman. If it's a Hanson mile, it gets charged to Hanson. I think that kind of leads into the third reason why I think it's a good idea, is there was a lot of discussion about the different ways in which the towns handle busing. Whitman has crossing guards, more sidewalks, so they don't bus anybody within a certain distance. Where Hanson doesn't have those things, they don't have as many sidewalks. It would be very easy for Hanson. It would be easier to not necessarily have the same policies. Hanson could do something a little different than Whitman. If they wanted to bus everybody, and Whitman only buses a certain amount of people, it really wouldn't affect the other town, because if Hanson wants to add more buses or more tiers, it's miles for Hanson. It doesn't necessarily affect Whitman. Same thing if you wanted to address the fact that some of those bus routes are longer. If Hanson wanted to add another tier to try to shorten things up, it wouldn't necessarily affect Whitman because it's a Hanson mile. So I really strongly support that discussion that you had, and I would really, when the time comes, to really consider assessing via the mileage.
all right, thank you, John. Okay, seeing no one else, we can close out public comment and we can kind of pick up where we left off. I think we don't have any minutes for this week, so we'll do those next week. So what I have on the list that I looked at was we wanted to talk about the definition of capital costs and emergency extraordinary expenses. We wanted to talk about the timing of payments, leases, and the statutory method in terms of what was in the amendment from last time. So unless anyone feels strongly, we can kind of follow that order. All right. Anyone on the topic? So definition of capital costs. So we all pull out our handy agreements or go to our drive, whichever we prefer. If we go to the original current agreement, the one that has the 1991 on the top right corner, if you flip to page 6 and you go to the top, if you look at letter B, there's a section in there about capital costs. I think rather than reading that, I want to give everyone just a couple minutes to read it, or I guess, yeah, that's probably the easiest thing, because I don't want to read it for you. You're good, you have to do it.
can have, this was extra, because I pulled most of it off.
Everyone else has a copy? Or you want?
These
All
are-
right, I'll read it real quick. That way folks reading it, watching at home. Yeah, I just don't want to turn into reading all these. All right, capital costs shall include all expenses in the nature of capital outlay, such as the cost of acquiring land, the cost of constructing, reconstructing, and adding to buildings, and the cost of remodeling or making extraordinary repairs to school buildings, including without limitation the cost of the original equipment and furnishings for such buildings or additions, plans, architects and consultant fees, grading, and other costs incidental to placing school buildings and additions and related premises in operating condition. Wow, that is a lot of sentence. Capital costs shall also include payment of principal of and interest on bonds or other obligations issued by the district to finance capital costs. And then there is some handwritten annotation here that I believe was amended, and that's why it's here. It looks like it was voted on 1/14/98, as best as I can see, and we can see, which also says, as relates to the elementary schools in each town, capital costs shall include, but not be limited to such items of expense described above, thank you, as exceed $5,000. So that's what is in the agreements that we have. If we flip to the 2018 proposed agreements, and we go to page 6, halfway down, capital, so that is section C. It's broken out a little bit differently. 1, capital cost shall include all expenses described in DESI's chart of accounts and the 7000 function code as may be modified by DESI from time to time. 2, apportionment of capital costs. Capital costs will be apportioned for the ensuing financial year as follows. Each member town's share of capital costs shall be determined by computing the ratio which the sum of its resident pupil enrollment in all member towns in the district, including out-of-district pupils, on October 1st of the fiscal year immediately preceding the year in which the committee votes to include capital costs in the budget, bears to the sum of the pupils residing in the member towns and receiving education at the district's expense on October 1 of the same preceding fiscal year. Getting one on sentences. Number 3, elementary schools and middle schools. Each member town shall be responsible for paying the capital costs as detailed in section 3B for its respective elementary and middle schools as it relates to the elementary and middle schools in each town. Capital costs shall include but not be limited to such expenses described exceeding $5,000. An article will be presented to the Selectman's office of the town for which capital improvements are requested. Approval of the voters will be required in order for the work to proceed. And the high school is owned by the district. Number 4, high school. The high school is owned by the district, therefore capital costs for the high school shall be apportioned to member towns according to section 5C2 above. Okay, so that's kind of what we have for language. What I was hoping is maybe between Jeff and John, we could kind of get to, in layman's terms, what we do today, and then maybe we can talk about what we're trying to do. I know Frank brought up the concerns. I was hoping to be here tonight about maybe trying to clarify some of this and get a committee member, but we can kind of talk about maybe some of the challenges we have with what capital costs are, what it means, etc. So maybe you guys can jump in a little bit here.
So I think so. Right now, what we do is we have an operations and capital committee that is co-chaired or is chaired by a member of the school committee, where we look at things within the district that are capital items, meaning facility-based and now technology-based, that we submit to the school committee and to the town of Whitman right now by October 1st for approval or for moving forward sometime in February. Lisa, I'm not sure what the answer date is. I think it's around that same time that you're looking for capital costs. What we run into some difficulty with are those capital costs deemed emergent over that $5,000. So because of a situation we've had, every year we have at least 1 or 2 things that the system goes down, say a boiler, our card access system, and we end up writing out an emergency amendment for capital costs submitted to both towns, if it's the high school or specific to the town, for an emergency request for funds that we need something right away. Can't wait till the May town meeting. That's where we get into what is the definition of an emergency cost. And we ran into that specifically in Whitman with some mold abatement and remediation at Whitman Middle School a year ago November. And we pushed back a little bit to the regional agreement, which is non-specific around emergency costs and what is an emergency. Is that regular, the mold was that regular maintenance, and it kind of kicked down to where we are now. The other piece is, $5,000, there was conversation in Whitman at one point to say that's a low number. As you saw, it was approved in 1998 at 5,000. It's 2023 right now. Is that a realistic number for the towns to do a capital expense over 5,000? So that's the roundabout of where we're at, and some of the questions that came through our office pertaining to the regional agreement. John, do you have anything else to add on that, or George?
No, I was just going to say for capital costs on bonding and things like that, it's assessed by whatever the interest of the cost of the bonding from the town that's doing the bonding and the borrowing. So, for example, Hanson has a HVAC bond anticipation. There's two of them out. Hanson pays the interest, and if they want to, they pay down some of the principal of it. Whitman took out a bond anticipation note for the feasibility study excuse me, at the Whitman Middle School. Yeah, Whitman pays that portion. And the high school debt is split on the 60/40.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue really is what is emergency? Like if we look at Hanson, we just had the issue, recently we sent a letter about there was a boiler issue that happened that we couldn't change whatever we needed, the connecting pin, whatever it was in the boiler, because there had to be a nitrous piece that was involved, so it was over 5,000. Winter was coming, that became an emergency thing. I don't know if we've had active debate about what constitutes an emergency, but we've had active debate on is $5,000 in this day and age something that is viable to both us and the towns. But when Jeff brought up the mold was never an issue at the Whitman Middle School because it was always paid by the town because there was part of an abatement plan. It only became an issue with the former, because that's Frank, the most recent town administrator. But there was always an abatement plan in place, so that became an emergency, so it wasn't something that should be done. I will say though, with McCorn, when the McCorn issues were happening, there was that active debate for a while on, is this something that should have been handled by the school, or is this something that does constitute emergency? But I think the real number is what is the number that sparks we need to go to the towns with this now.
And if you even look from what Chris just read, it doesn't really state emergency in either the old agreement or the modified agreement. It doesn't define that. It just says keep exceeding $5,000. So if you can drill down to what those emergency costs are, would be good for us.
So let's take it in pieces, right? So in terms of capital costs, let's try and focus on the one. So because we kind of have an old version kind of spells some stuff out, and then the 2008 proposed version, it just says Jesse's chart account 7,000. So I don't know if you have the chart accounts memorized, John, or have access to that anyway at this point. But maybe just so we can kind of compare and contrast, do you know what's in the 7,000 function code?
Yeah, it's acquisition and replacement, et cetera, fixed assets. So I don't have the budget in front of me, but if I something close to, in the past, in fiscal year 22, I think we only had $40,000 in there for computer reimbursements, computer replacements. I think 23, I think we put the Chromebooks in the 7,000, so that one-time purchase of Chromebooks. So it's any fixed asset that we're purchasing during the year, those are the 7,000.
And again, in layman's terms, fixed assets would traditionally be like our buildings, or equipment,
vehicles.
So the whole point of this is we're talking about, I think, right? So this is where we've got to kind of talk through this together. So the point of this seems like it was basically when we have big expensive things, right? Buildings, equipment, technology, right? we're going to build a plan for those, and there's going to be some sort of approval process with the town because they're kind of funded outside the budget because they're big, expensive things. They're not normal operating costs. They're kind of outside of that, okay? So we probably need to think about a little bit about what is that process, right? So, for example, and I don't know, I'm just throwing this out here, but if we're going to have a committee that's going to look at that, is that something that we want in here? Do we want to describe the process? Do we want to describe the timing, or do we not, right? Because if we, pros and cons, right? If we describe the process, then we got to stick to it. Like now we got to follow the process. If we don't, then we don't have a process, but then we're going to all be kind of sitting here saying, well, Jeff did it this way, Bruce did it this way, right? So we don't have to answer that, but we got to kind of think through the balancing act of what do we define and what do we not define?
For instance, Bruce input technology capital, it was always funded through the school budget, and which became challenging because of infrastructure, as we've seen, it was end of life because it was never supported through the district budget.
Right.
So I think.
Right, and I think there's also statutory implications in this because we have a process that we're trying, that's evolving, so Whitman put a timetable for October 1st. Hanson sort of worked with that same timetable with the Hanson folks. But technically, I think the statutory regulation is that the school committee, in the form of the capital subcommittee, goes to the school committee, and then anything they put forward goes to the ballot regardless. You know what I mean? They have the right to put it forward. So when you talk about multiple layers, there are multiple layers, but what piece do we want to attack first? Because there's the piece of the cost for emergency, there's the piece of how that works, and then there's the piece of capital in general.
Right. So, and maybe there's some things that we can kind of follow up and build on. So maybe one thing that would be helpful is if you can give us a list of the 7,000 proposals, so we can actually see what's there for next time. That would be helpful. Yeah, I mean, in terms of process, yeah, I mean, we could look at that. I thought we did clarify, I could be wrong, but I thought the point that George is bringing up now in terms of whether things go right to the ballot, I thought we did clarify with Andy that the Board of Selectmen still has to push things on.
They have to, yes, they do.
Yes. So are you talking about something different there?
No, I'm talking about the clarity of, if I thought you said if we design the process here in the agreement.
Correct.
Right, but that process does have statutory requirements. So the end result is whatever happens at the end of the day, the school committee can put forward what they need, and then it still has to go on. You know what I mean? So it's not like we can just decide that, I don't believe, because there's that statutory piece that's involved.
Statutory in terms of, sorry, I'm helping understand, in terms of timing or what or when?
I believe that a regional school district can put what they feel they need, what's it called, write the warrant, the town article. They can send the articles for the town meeting.
Yep.
And they write an article for the spring meeting, and it doesn't necessarily need, I think, the two towns, if they have a subcommittee of capital. But what we've tried to do in being good partners is do the timelines that towns have set out.
Kind of respect the process that exists today. Again, understanding that process could change tomorrow or in the future too. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay. So right now we're submitting from the subcommittee from the schools to the school committee, and that's going to the subcommittees in both towns.
Correct.
Okay. And your point is technically it could skip the subcommittees and just go right to the boards of selectmen, select board, because technically they could put it right.
Right, or if all I was saying was if we do something in this new regional agreement,
right,
we just have to be mindful of the end result.
Correct. Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, I know you're not taking a position on which was right, it's just more absolutely good point. Understanding the implications of that. So, okay, so we kind of have the what. Sorry, Jim, did you have something?
Well, I was only going to ask because I've heard it twice from Jeff and George. In this day and age, and I'm only paraphrasing, but in this day and age when, the first agreement was done, it was $5,000.
Yep.
And that's crazy. But 6 years ago, when we talked about doing it again, it was still $5,000.
Right.
So I guess my question would be, what do you want that number to be?
So if you ask us, I want it as low as possible,
Right.
but I understand,
Well, so there's an implication here, and this, right, so the part, right, this is where it all goes hand in hand, and this is why this is really important, we gotta think through the ramifications. So, if there is a sufficient balance in E&D, right? And you have some of these smaller capital items that are of emergency nature, then that would be the funding mechanism, right? So that's okay. If there's no E&D, right, or very low E&D, then we got to be careful because you don't want to start, saying, well, it's $100,000, and meanwhile there's nothing. Okay, it becomes a funding issue. Not that it's probably a lot easier for the towns, because I don't, the towns aren't really swimming in that either, but certainly they have other means in terms of some of the things that.
And I think going with the $100,000 in an emergency situation, is beyond the normal stuff that happens, because if it's 100,000, something's wrong before you need the 100,000. So I guess, for me, I'm just looking, as a committee, what do we want that number to be?
Yeah, so our thoughts.
And don't be afraid, John, don't be afraid to say the number, if there's a number.
So the thing that Justin, were you trying to?
Yeah, so I went back to look at, Whitman redefined the capital committee a couple of years ago, and in doing that, defined what a capital cost is to us.
Okay.
And so we just read that section of the warrant article. The committee shall review requests for capital purchases, which shall be defined as purchases of vehicles and equipment, including technology equipment and software, costing $20,000 or more and having a useful life in excess of 5 years. Purchases that are that in aggregate exceed $20,000 and having a life expectancy greater than 5 years shall be considered capital purchases.
Okay.
So in 2021, that was where the town was.
Well, I agree with that definition because I think that's what we use, and that's in the purchase of capital that would go through the process. I think the other question is the $5,000 that's deemed
Right.
when there's an emergency.
So maybe, right, so this is kind of why it's good to have this conversation. So maybe a
Absolutely.
normal capital item could be 100,000, right?
Right,
We're going to
exactly.
know we
We
need
need 2 trucks.
Exactly. And we didn't wake up
So
yesterday or
we
tomorrow.
need 2 trucks.
New trucks, we need a new building, like these are not, so maybe we need to think about a normal capital cost needs to either fit with what Whitman's doing, or I don't know if Hanson's crossed this bridge, or it's a larger number, but emergency repairs are different. That's
where I was going with you with E&D, because E&D is supposed to be our emergency if we need be. And again, we've talked a little bit about the 5. I know 5 is low. I don't know where we land, because I also don't know how the 2 towns handle our emergency costs and what that burden is. So nobody's ever said, well, because we've been able to go forward, and most of our expenses have been covered. Not that we go too much, but when we go, they're covered and it's taken care of. So I don't know if that's an undue burden on 2 communities, or if there is their version of E&D in their capital costs for the town. I just don't know what those numbers are. So I want to follow which is fair for all 3 parties.
But I'm sorry, John,
No, go ahead.
you raised your hand.
I have the 7,000. Joey got it, so we want to go back to that.
Yeah, no, we'll keep on this part.
Okay, so if, we just have the money over here, whatever that amount is going to be, do we first need to define what an emergency is?
Yeah, I think so.
So, for me, and this was just listening to George and sitting here and just listening and trying to come up with what an emergency would be. And for me, it would be something like if a student or faculty are in danger. Now, danger would be a boiler going out, for me, a mold situation, and obviously other things that I can't think of right now, but that would be for me the definition. Or, and I'm trying to use layman's terms, but any kind of situation that would put anyone's life in peril. So if the school doesn't have heat, we have a problem.
And I would even
I'm sorry.
A flood.
Yeah, safety or the interruption of the normal school day cannot take place.
Something
almost
like
perfect.
day-to-day operations.
Yeah, like a day-to-day operation, like we had the flood here on the 1st floor. you know, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago maybe, like, and that became something that was like, okay, here we go. This is something that has to be done, we have to do that. So I think we need to, and I also say, we're at the point where, with our insurances, when you pay the deductible, we're like at $10,000. So, if it were me, I'm not the superintendent, he'd tell me to shut up. But, I mean, I think we have to say, what is the piece that says, in an emergency situation, we have to go to the towns? Separate is what Justin's talking about. What is the piece in the normal course of a year for capital, either new initiative or replacement?
You called me Justin.
Oh, no,
Justin,
no,
you pointed over here and called me Justin.
No,
You son of a gun.
He voted.
Yes. So I think there's two issues that we have to work out if we're going to work it out.
Right. Okay, so this is helpful. So it sounds like there's some sort of general construct around and capital improvements, enhancements, building stuff, and then emergency costs. And we even have, something that impacts day-to-day operations, safety of students, staff, and so we can tweak that. We can even have an attorney or someone help us with that language. But we can probably build something that kind of captures that. It's still going to be subject to interpretation, right? Because you may say, well, this impacts the safety, and Jim or Justin or both of them might say, no, it's fine, it's the AC, it's only 85, when I went to school. I'll make it up, right? Like, so we're still going to probably, I don't think we'll be able to ever get language that, and I don't think we want it, because we're just going to get too into the minutia if we try and list, like, here's what emergency means. Like,
Something that we don't think about.
Right. But it sounds like it is a good principle, something that's students, staff, safety, day-to-day operations. That might be kind of where we work to emergency. Emergency, do you want to talk about emergency amounts then? Is it still over 5,000?
Yeah, I would make the recommendation that we raise that. Again, as the superintendent, I want to keep that as low as possible.
Right.
But I need to know what works in the communities, and I don't know that number. I don't want to say, I don't want to play poker here. Hey, we should do 20, and I want to know what works.
So,
Doesn't it also depend on what is left in E&D?
Yeah, exactly.
Say, if you had, if you have the money there, you could spend it, but,
So I'm almost thinking out loud that this might be way too tricky. I don't want to go, it's dangerous to think out loud. But do we think about tying it to the balance of E&D? Because, right, would you give a different answer? If there's $2 million in E&D, are you going to give me one answer? And if I tell you there's $500,000 in E&D, are you going to give a different answer? Right? Like, isn't that a huge piece of this? Right? Do we make it self-correct? So, for example, at the beginning of the fiscal year, we identify what's in E&D, and if there's at least this much in E&D, then an emergency repair is based upon this. And if there's less than this in E&D, then it's $5,000.
If you could write that in the agreement, and again, if we're going to review the agreement every 5 years,
Right.
you can see how it worked.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So like if you have this jumping off point that moves from, I'm just spitball, you have a jumping off point that moves from something like 5,000 to 10,000 upon the 5-year review and or balance of, $1 million or more, then you set what that rate is. Because, let's say there's something devastating that happens. You might not be in a point to burn all your E&D, you might still have to go to the town. So, but I think that both can play a role, the balance of E&D, and then what is an emergency or extraordinary situation that goes to the towns. If we're speaking about that.
You could maybe also set parameters. We could list them. If E&D is this amount, then this amount will follow. If E&D is this amount, you go from this to this. So, yeah, give a percentage or give parameters. Listing it.
Yeah, so that's kind of the spirit where I'm going. I'm always careful when I start suggesting like stuff. I can picture this in an agreement, and I'm thinking of like someone reading it 10 years from now, and I just want to make sure it makes sense and we're not over-engineering it to the point where they're like, what the hell would they think? Why would they? Right, so that's, but yeah.
When you look at, you look at your tax base, if I make between this amount and this amount, this says this is my tax, or this amount, this is my tax. So they list it out so that you can look at the numbers, see what you fall in between, and then this is what, and again, you can list, again, parameters.
I'm looking at, this year was unusual right now with the $100,000 cost, part of the bridge piece of it, as far as our locks on our doors. But on average, I'm not sending an extraordinary, I'm not sending $300,000 worth of emergency capital during the course of the year. I don't remember doing that, and I don't think Ernie did that, even when I had to sign off. It wasn't outrageous, it was like $8,000. It was like $15,000 sporadic as we went to building the building. It was a boiler issue, it was something that the AC unit, because if it was the AC unit, it's going to go on part of the capital plan, which is going to come up to the capital committee, which is going to go forward in May. As a vetted out process versus oh my gosh, we don't have heat tomorrow, and that is a dangerous piece, and the boiler's done, and it's going to be $25,000. So I think we can look at the, and again, if our thoughts aren't well received over the next 5 years, it's a modification in that agreement.
So let's back up a little bit. So because you alluded to it, and I know we touched on this, but is there any way to ensure the agreement's going to get looked at every 5 years?
No, but I think
I'm
we
sorry,
have
Chris, did you say reviewed?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do we, like, is there,
If
again, right, like, how do we make, if we say that that's important, how, is it, we're gonna make it expire after 5 years? Like, how are we gonna do that to make sure?
Isn't it in the original agreement that it needs to be reviewed every 5 years?
That's kind of my point.
And
Here we are 4 years later.
that's why I said at our first meeting, I want to see it reviewed every 3 years, because you may have someone still here 3 years from now to at least do the first review. And, you know, if there's a new finance committee member or a new select board or selectman in Whitman, it keeps changing over. So that at least you would think that, you know, 3 years from now, it should be reviewed, and at least 3 people sitting here will still be here.
Right. I mean, the review itself, right, could just be, hey, we all read it.
Yeah, we
We're
could-
good.
Or
Or we need to
one or
update,
two
hey.
I think, could we write in something like sort of like, we write in something that says that the boards of selectmen, the finance committees, and the school committee, every 3 years, whatever, have to at least have it on the agenda for review. And then, should anyone, you know, then whatever comes of that review, you might reconvene the team. Because you might, your committee, you know what I mean? We all might look at it and say, hey, this is fine. Then it goes to the next 3 years. You know, I mean, I don't know if it needs a, and listen, I don't vote, so you do it. But I don't know if it needs a full reconvening of a regional agreement committee, or it needs to at least be in the forefront that says, these committees have to look at it. So if there's something very different in the Whitman, or if there's something very different in Hanson, or the school committee needs to make it, you know, we have to bring it up on the agenda.
Okay, that's an easy fix, George. Chris, if you don't mind for 1 second. Justin, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so Justin, let me ask you a question. The end of May, after your elections, or maybe in June, does your Board of Selectmen, if there are new members that come in, do they take over committees that other members were part of, or do you guys like switch it around?
Our chair reassigns me when they review. It doesn't usually change much, but
Right, well, you get assigned, you get to pick. Too bad for you. Anyways, this past May, like when Kenny Mitchell left, I went on Parks and Fields because Kenny was gone, there were new people coming in. So this would just be another committee. But, you know, and nobody wants to be on another committee, and I get that. But if you're assigned in Whitman, or you pick it in Hanson, this is the committee that you're on, and within your first 3 years of being a select on the board, you would have to come to 1 or 2 of these meetings to have it reviewed. It just becomes part of it. You know, the finance committee, you know, you guys could pick, you know, who's going to come. But as the school committee, the same thing's going to happen. So it's just, you know, you're on it now, 3 years from now, are you still on it, or did it go to someone else? It just becomes part of the committee, and we can put that in the agreement.
Yeah, so we can definitely, and I know I took this down the sidebar because I know we're capital costs, apologies, but we'll get back in a second. So I think, you know, maybe there's definitely some language we gotta put in here, right? So I hear what you're saying, but I also think like that becomes a little difficult to administer in the regional agreement because each of those boards is independent. So for example, right, like what you just said, in Hanson, you get to pick. At Whitman, the chair assigns it. At the school committee, we kind of have an open discussion, it's just worked itself out. I think, if I remember correctly, looking at this, because I had to get calculated with this, I think, if I remember correctly, there's a general requirement or authority that the chair will select subcommittee assignments, right? So the problem is, so we kind of pick, you guys kind of pick, so on and so forth, they get assigned. But that could change, like, it's gonna come down to probably the chairperson, right? So the chairperson's kind of like, hey, let's bat it around. It's gonna be batted around. The chairperson's like, no, you're doing this, then it's gonna kind of, so that's kind of the hard part. I kind of like where George is almost starting with this of, maybe we put it back on each of the individual bodies to say, whatever, on, maybe we even write a date. In January, pick June, whatever, June, use your point, because it's shifted, right? In June, each board shall be required to put on the agenda every 3 years to review it, and every member has to review it. Then we avoid the whole, like, well, Jim understands it, or Chris understands it. Now, Chris isn't part of it, or Jim's not part of it, no one understands. No, you gotta read it, like, sorry, it's not that bad, it's not that fun, but it's not that bad. You gotta read it every 3 years. And then, building on what George said, maybe we do something that any one of those groups, including finance committee, any one of those groups, if they want, can force us to then
Bring this committee together.
right, and just take it right. So if everyone reads it, and they're like, yep, good, great, we're good. Everyone's gonna have it in their meeting when they did it. Fine, we go another 3 years. But if anyone feels uncomfortable or they see something that's wrong, great. Now it kicks off this process, we build it, and get together and we sort it out. So I think we could, but I think we almost need, I don't know, I feel like we need a date like in June, because I feel like if we just say like on a regular basis, annually, like it's not,
Well,
never gonna
I would say if we were going to review the contract, the agreement, that if the different committees were to do it by September to get ready for January. This way we don't have to, start before Christmas and then take the break, and all of that. And it's really just a review. I can't imagine that, 3 years from now, maybe 6 years, but 3 years from now, there would be any changes. So you come in, you do 2 meetings at an hour and a half each meeting, and we're good to go. If there are changes, okay, it's going to get a little tougher, but it should be able to, in January starting it, but in September, after everybody's re-elected or elected, you go through the whole process in the summer, and that's in the agreement where it says, by September 30th, you need to have this on the agenda.
Does that sound conceptually like?
Yeah.
See some nodding heads. Justin? I mean, we'll have to get
I think
into
that
the
makes-
language, but.
Yeah. Our, the select board reappointment schedule is usually June. This would be, if we're on a 3-year cycle, this would kind of slot in there pretty neatly.
Good. All right, so we can kind of, I think with some of these, what I'm kind of thinking out loud is we'll kind of, so we don't violate anything, but I'll maybe try and take a crack at some language that we can then share and talk about and just refine. Because ultimately we need some degree of language that we all feel good about. Some of those that are better with language or have legal backgrounds can make sure that we get the language right. But we can kind of all talk through language. So that's one that we'll take away for next time and maybe just have some conceptual language that we can kind of, again, we don't have to vote it, but at least these are the things that we can take back. What I'm envisioning is when we get to that point, we'll kind of have some takeaways. Here are the things that we talked about. Here's some of the conceptual language we talked about. Now bring it back to your respective boards. So we actually have language that we've talked about, and then we can kind of tweak it from there. So each of you would then have to conceptually explain, using this as an example, here's some language, this is why we're doing it, this is what we're thinking, and here's the language that we proposed, what do you think? Then we can kind of bring it back and keep it going on. So, okay. Excellent. So we kind of knocked out review of agreement, which organically just flowed from the conversation, which is important. Like, this is a good thing. That's what we're doing. Bringing it back to capital costs and emergency costs, do we have, so kind of getting back to that, do we want to mull that over a little bit? Do we want to go to our respective boards on what an emergency cost should be? Or do we want to propose something that we can, again, kind of put on a document that they can?
$6,258.
Yeah, Justin. Justin.
John?
I had a thought on the emergency cost. We could go sort of in the other direction and just say an emergency act determined by either the school committee or the superintendent for which no other funds are reasonably available. Keep it pretty open for the school committee to have the flexibility to say, this is an emergency that affects our students, and we need to ask the town to pay for it.
I think that ties into, I hear what you're saying.
I'll first of all say it's too
Wide
late.
open.
But it's wide open because reasonably, I think, I agree, but what then, I think it'll tie into the percentage of E&D that we were talking about, what's reasonable.
Well, right, no, I think, Justin, so you can bring up another point, this is all great conversation. So the question is, like, the way I'm reading the current agreement, it's not really an ask, it's a, here's the bill.
Yes.
Right? So, and again, we can kind of do it either way, but that would be different, right? So it would be, hey, we're asking first. Now, again, it could be, hey, we're saying, here's the bill, and we're not going to pay it. Like the whole issue that came up, right? That's kind of landed there. But do we want something in the agreement that is specific that says, if it meets this definition, then the towns shall pay, right? So,
Well,
you see what I'm saying, Justin, or rather than it being it's more of a binding.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no, sorry.
We're talking about D&D, and I'm just trying to keep simple numbers. But if it was 10% of what is in the D&D,
No, it's the other way. So I think the way we're talking about it, right? So roughly what do we have in E&D, the current certified amount, new certified, John?
The old number
Yeah, the
was
old
1.8, I think.
1.6. So right now there's 1.8 million in E&D,
okay.
right? And so that's roughly,
We took 400, 500.
what percent is that? About 50 million, roughly. What do we have for percent?
2.6,
Sorry.
would be 3 something.
1.8 out of 50,
Okay,
3.6.
so they, yeah, 3.5%. So we're like 3.5%. We can have up to 5%. Okay, so we could have up to 2.5 million in E&D. We have 1.8.
I'm talking, I'm sorry, Chris, I'm talking about if there's an emergency.
Correct. Yes. So I think the conversation about like the grid we were talking about is based upon that amount that's in E&D, not how much would come out. Are you saying like it should be based upon like how much we're taking out of there?
Well, we talked earlier about, an amount of money that you would need.
Yep.
And I'm thinking if it exceeds 10% of what because like with Justin's idea, it's kind of wide open. This says it's not wide open. If you have 500,000 in D&D and the repair is more than 50,000, you have to come to the towns for the remainder of the money.
Again, this is why we talked through. See, the way that Lisa was proposing it, like this is in my head, again, it's in my head. I was picturing almost like a matrix that said, if E&D has a balance of $1 million or more, or I'm just making up numbers, if it has $1 million or more, then, an emergency repair would be, 25,000, right? And if E&D is like 200,000 or less, then emergency repair might be $500, right? Because there's nothing in there. Like we don't want to touch it. There is no funding source. So it would almost self-correct in the example you gave. So let's just say we had $1 million in there, and it's 100,000. And let's just say we had a $2 million repair. Well, now E&D is going to be at that lower level, or we could kind of work that language in there to your point, so that it wouldn't be, we can't deplete all of E&D.
Right, and it would be, using your example, that if there's $1 million in D&D and it's a $2 million repair, it's over, obviously it's over the 10%. So you would pay the first $1 million, and somehow the towns would have to come up with that second $1 million to fix whatever the $2 million problem is. But if it's 200,000 in D&D, and the repair is 25,000, then the towns have to come up with it because you have less than 10% in D&D.
Less than
But,
10% left over.
the best way to do it, I'm sorry?
The $25,000 cost is more than 10% of the balance in E&D.
So that would be up to the town. But, a $2 million repair is a big repair, but we'll use that 25,000 or 250,000, and you've got $2 million in D&D, you pay for it. But if you only have 200,000 and it's a $25,000 repair, it's got to be the towns that pay for it. And I think that, Justin, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's kind of where you're going. But I'm just trying to add to what you said, that there has to be a percentage before they can come to the towns. Your turn to answer, Justin.
Yeah, that is kind of what I was thinking. I thought we could leave it a little more open in the agreement and then have the district set a policy for what those thresholds would be, so that we don't, you know, lock ourselves into a weird spot.
Yeah, I get it. I think the hard part
Yeah.
is just going from the current where it's anything over 5,000 is automatically, well, I guess it's not automatic because I guess it's subject to the interpretation.
Do you need language for emergency in the regional agreement? You need language for capital costs in the agreement, but emergency, I've looked at several other districts that don't have emergency costs codified in their agreement. So like reasonable people can come to the same reasonable conclusion.
Oh.
So
You know, that we would be the whole thing.
I think this came up because of the mold.
Yeah.
Right now. So this is, I mean, prior to that, there was, from the former superintendent and myself, I looked back to 2014 and that was covered as an emergency abatement in Whitman, and now we got pushed back on that. So I think for me, I like a lot of gray, but I need to make sure we have something that when I'm gone or whatever, that doesn't happen again. So.
Yeah, great.
So I think, yeah, they're all good points in terms of,
So we can come up with some language around emergency that we can get around for the next meeting. And then I think if we come up with a percentage chart, maybe.
well, so it depends, right? Because I think one of the things we're kind of stumbling across now, right, is emergency clearly defined, which it probably isn't, which is why we're having the conversation. So now we're trying to define, like, should it or shouldn't be, and what does or doesn't make sense.
The issue became emergency versus general maintenance. That was the issue. So it became, because it was centered around mold. So it became, would that not have happened if general upkeep that the district was supposed to be responsible for took place? Depending on the town administrator or the whim of whoever makes those decisions, change that. So that's why this came to the forefront.
And then we're back to what is the funding source, right? So, and because I want to, you know, certainly we can't lose sight of the mold issue, but we should be thinking bigger picture, right? So we have flood, we have boilers.
But it also comes down to the big picture of, if they're the town's buildings,
Right.
then what's the responsibility of the town to maintain those town's buildings?
Right.
So a lot of it isn't just E&D, it's the town's buildings.
Right.
So that is an added layer also.
Yeah. Right, because the hard part becomes if you did have a boiler or you did have a flood, what does that look like? And how do you fund it, right? Like it's,
Because the challenge too is, if we have an emergency, 9 times out of 10 it's covered by insurance.
and I kind of want to go there.
And we are covered by insurance. However, a $10,000 or an $8,000 or $9,000 piece in a boiler is under our deductible of $10,000 for insurance.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's where we get caught in the semantics of that piece of it. I don't think anything has been super extraordinary outside of that 100,000 this summer around the buildings and locks, which was a definite safety issue for our students. Doors were locked, but we couldn't get people in and out. So I think that was there. So I think clarifying about the operation, as George had said, and Jim had said about the safety, and outside the regular school day, that impacts the school day for safety security, would be an emergency cost.
So what do we do in terms of, what have we done in the past with insurance? So for example, like the flood.
Flood was all insurance. Cleaning, everything, restoration.
So what happens, so if we say to the towns, hey, we have this catastrophic issue, sometimes, hopefully it's going to be insured, but maybe not, right? So if it is insured, so if we have a catastrophic issue, boiler is probably a bad one because we're not going to get that through insurance, but flood, right? So we can kind of probably use these two examples. We have boiler, which is just maintenance, breaks, we're not gonna get any type of insurance. Maybe there's a warranty, but let's just assume there isn't, and then we got like flood, which is just a heck of a god thing. So if we have a flood, and let's say we just need $100,000 to clean it up right now, right? Does it make sense to go to the towns for that?
I
Because,
don't think we did.
oh, we did, okay, no.
Flood was insurance, but what about the mold? Why was that not an insurance claim?
For the past.
The middle school mold
I
issue,
don't think we did, did we?
it couldn't be submitted as an insurance claim.
I know on the homeowner side, that's a tough one.
Clearly mold during COVID.
Yeah, no, maybe
Building
there's
association.
government money, but yeah. So maybe we need to think about this one a little bit more and
So-
pick up back up on this one. 'Cause I don't
Just,
know.
I'm sorry, just so I have clarification, the flood was covered by insurance.
From what I recall, I wasn't the superintendent, but I believe so, because it was done, I mean, we had, yes, it was 3 days before graduation, and everything was covered. The remediation of all the water, all the walls had to be cleaned, but I believe that was an insurance cost, so I can give a deductible.
So 10,000.
At that point, I think so, that's 7 years ago. I would assume so, yes.
Okay, and then the mold most recently was not covered by insurance.
I believe that wasn't submitted to insurance.
Okay. Okay, I just want clarification on that.
Yeah, and so one of the things, this is kind of where I was just thinking, maybe, I don't know, you're kind of going in the same direction. Maybe it would be helpful to kind of understand like what have been the emergency repairs over the last 5 years, or we should, just so we can understand what they are. Because again, a boiler, like, okay, what do you do with that? Right? Like, again, I think if there is,
We had the issue at Indian Head a few years ago with this, with the crew was putting in work crew was putting in a suspended ceiling, somebody hit a pipe, burst, water burst everywhere, there was 2 floors worth of damage 2 weeks before school started. I don't know the funding source, but I remember
yeah,
that was the time of it.
There was insurance as well.
Yeah.
right, because I think that's important, right? Because I think if, like, to me now, we're back into the spirit of being personal, just speaking for myself, we're under the spirit of being deep, right? So if something breaks and we got $100,000 to fix it, but we know there's a reasonable assurance that we're going to put in a claim and get it back, I don't know, like from my perspective, I don't want to bother the towns with that. What do you need? Just take it out and we put it back. There has to be a reasonable assurance, right? So again, a 25-year-old boiler explodes and we need a new boiler. Like, to me, that's not E&D, that's capital that we probably didn't get to, and now we need a new boiler. It's a 25-year-old boiler, so, you know, how we get, to me, that really, again, just speaking for myself, that doesn't feel like it should come out of E&D, because, again, like, it's a boiler in a building. You know, so I don't know, I think maybe we gotta think through this one a little bit more.
I think so, because I think it really does come down to who owns the buildings at some point. If you're talking about not just an insurance claim, but if you're talking about the replacement of something like a boiler in the building, you know, because that begets the question. And we're all here doing our good thing, and not sure that that's always happened in the past. So I think that's where we've got to get to. If it's a building that's owned by the town, and it's a long-term issue, does E&D handle the short-term issue of the insurance and that piece? But then where does it go from there?
Yeah, I agree. And because the whole ownership of the buildings, right, like when you think about that conceptually, it is very different, right? So if we think about it, I own the house and Jeff's renting my house, I still own the house. It's my asset. At some point, I can tell Jeff to get the hell out, I'll let someone else in. It's not, right, when you think of the relationship that we have in the school building, it's kind of different. It's not like Whitman Hanson's gonna wake up tomorrow and be like, hey, you're out. Silver Lake or whoever's coming in, right? Like, it doesn't work that way. Like, these are, sorry, I had to,
Just hypothetical.
Yeah.
whoever, I'm using a school, right? Like, it's not like that flea market type building, like, I own it and I can do with it what I want. No, it's a school building. Yes, technically Whitman owns it and Hanson owns it, but it's gonna be a school for Whitman Hanson forever. Like, it just is what it is. And what complicates it further, as we talked about, the towns don't manage it or maintain it, like that's the school. So it is kind of I hear your point, but it is kind of a unique animal in that it's not like a traditional, you own it, you need to fix it, okay, my lease is up. It's different, like these are forever leases pretty much, so we gotta think that through.
I want to see if I can kind of dismantle your theory for a second. If the boiler is 25 years old, is
Right.
that on your capital matrix after 20 years? So that in the next 5 years, you're replacing the boiler before it blows up and causes,
So this is where it gets hard, right? So for example, right, so now what happens if that, in this particular example, I'm making it up, but what happens if that boiler was on the capital and it wasn't funded?
That's where we get to the problem, is it wasn't funded, so the capital
Now it
maintenance here, it gets bumped down here, and it's never funded by the town, and then it goes up, and the town says, wow,
that would be part of your capital.
well, we would submit it to the towns, and if the towns voted no on it, then I would get
So
it.
that's where it's hard. Like, for example, like if a building needs a new roof, you ask for a new roof, and you don't get a new roof, and then there's problems with the roof, it's not as clear cut as, so it's not, this is where, again, where it's an imperfect relationship, because if the schools own the building, they just do whatever they want, right? But they don't own the buildings. So now you've got to go through the capital request, and if you say, hey, we need this, and the answer is, well, no, we can't afford it, just because we can't, like, again, not picking, you know, just can't be done right now. You see the capital matrices of both towns. It's just how it goes. And now something breaks, well, what happens, right? That shouldn't be, the 25-year-old boiler shouldn't be funded, for me, shouldn't be funded. Like, that's not, we're not using E&D to buy boilers, right? Maybe we fix it, emergency repair, maybe, but this is where it gets, this is where it's going to require more thought, because it's not a clear cut. It's a shared responsibility at the end of the day. There's no way, like if we want to make it like it's the towns versus the schools, to me, it argument falls apart. It's a shared, the mechanism that we're stuck with is a shared responsibility, so it's complicated. So I guess let's take that one away in terms of maybe next week we can kind of see, does anyone have any thoughts on what is an emergency repair? What does that relationship look like? I think it's helpful for us to have this conversation because I can picture this is going to be a school committee conversation at some point, and I'm sure boards of selectmen, select board, right, it's finance committees, like this isn't, but I think if we can kind of bat it around with each of those perspectives, we're going to be better off when it goes there, opposed to just doing something kind of half-baked, so, okay. So we need to think about emergency costs. So we got some good consensus on capital costs and maybe what those look like and how they go, and the big part we're getting stuck on is emergency, so we can pick that up. Okay, so we got the first item, kind of done. Do we want to talk about timing of payments real quick and then maybe Paul?
Yeah, John, you and Lisa probably know more about the timing of the payments, and Frank brought this up.
So I'm going to, real quick, I'll frame it for us, for those following along. If you look at the old agreement, 7F, and I'm just going to paraphrase here, it basically talks about the apportionment and the operating costs and the town's requirement of the old agreement on August 1st, November 1st, February 1st, and April 1st, each to pay 25% of that. And then the 2018 agreement, if you go to page 8, letter F, again, I'm paraphrasing, yeah, here it is, it's just spelled out. Letter F, number 2, the annual share of each member town shall be paid in equal installments, not later than the first day of August, November, February, and May. So it was August, November, February, April. The proposed was August, November, February, May. But I think we also need to talk about how that aligns with the towns and their collections of tax revenue. So if you want to try and share your thoughts.
It's around the real estate tax bills, that's what the towns get their money. And real estate tax bills are due August 1st, November 1st, February 1st, and May 1st. So it's to try to align those two. And, our assessment should be around when the towns get the money to pay the bill. It's always tough the first quarter. The first quarter is always tough. It's just there's a lot of things that get paid right at the beginning of the year. The debt payment, the way the debt was structured here, that the first payment is on July 1, first day of the year, which is extremely difficult to find. It's just there's no cash for $1 million, $600,000. So we would need to, know, I don't want to speak for Frank, I don't know where he's going with it, but I think what he wants is having that going forward in any type of borrowing, or not just in the assessment, but in any type of borrowing, take the cash flow of the towns into consideration when coming up with debt.
So do you think that would change the dates, or would make it, like, are there different dates we can use, or that's the problem?
When, for example, you know, let's say we're going to do a borrowing for $1 million or something, we start talking about it, you can say when you want the dates to be payable. So you can say 8/1, 11/1, 2/1, semi-annually, most debt. So it would be August 1 and February 1. So it would align with when the towns have the time to pay, as opposed to, again, the high school debt is July 1 and January 1, which is the time the towns to pay.
Got it. Got it. So it's aligning.
I
So
think that's where it's going.
Yeah, maybe we can even save that. Unless anyone else. See, I was almost thinking, is it like is it, for example, not August 1st? It should be like August 30th for timing. But we don't know.
You could be thinking like August 15th.
Yeah, Justin, please.
So this, our former treasurer collector and pending contract negotiations, our next town administrator, brought this one up to me, and it was because the April payment is only 2 months after the February payment. So at the end of March every year, she had to either do some extraordinary moving money around to make that payment to the district, or just tell the district we were going to be late.
Got
And
it.
it happened every year for almost 30 years.
So
It's a fourth quarter payment.
So Justin, if we moved the April to May, does that solve that issue, or am I missing it?
That would solve that issue.
Okay.
It would align with the real estate payment. So we would be collecting our money instead of back to you.
So we probably need someone, it sounds like, and we can confirm this, but maybe there's some language around some of our capital costs in terms of being thoughtful of trying to align those. So whether there's some language that says, we can use it sounds like the 2008 agreement probably has pretty close to language because it did reflect that change from April 1st to May 1st. But maybe we can also think about some language that also says, the schools will try and work as best as possible with towns in terms of how they align borrowings and capital payments, right? So again, it's just a simple spirit of let's work together. I don't know if we need to codify, or we can codify and say every one of those, has to also fall in these periods. Maybe that's an open question, so we can pick back up on timing of payments next time too. And like I said, I know Frank brought this up, so hopefully it'll be. Is that good enough for tonight, or do we want to keep going?
Let's keep going.
Want to keep going a little bit more? All right.
Yeah, because I don't want to make it difficult, sorry, John. I don't want to make it more difficult, but I think it would be the finance committees of each town. Not only move that back to May, but make the first 3 payments at 30%, and that May payment only 10%.
Oh.
Justin, would that help? And
I'm not sure.
okay, and that's why I said I think, on this, maybe the finance
Take
committee
it away. Oh, yeah.
meet with the town administrator or the town accountant to say, 5% more each month, and then only 10% on the last payment.
Yeah, if we could, right, because I think we're trying to guess at, exactly, so yes, 100%. I think we're trying to guess at what the problem is.
Right.
So maybe if, between the town administrator that's here and the finance committee members, we can kind of flush that out. You can even share, like, here's the proposed language, or we're having some conversations about not only the dates, but also the amounts and capital costs. Can you share thoughts so we can bring it back for next time? Yeah, thanks.
Okay,
absolutely.
yeah,
That's great.
I would want to just run it by my treasurer collector
Yeah.
and accountants too, just to work that out and see how that would work. Get their thoughts for it as well.
Yeah, because ultimately they're going to drive it, so we might as well get their input now instead of building something and then having it go through all these
Exactly.
boards and then have them come back and be like, what the hell you guys are doing? This is what we do, so absolutely, I think it's wonderful. Take that away. We'll keep that as an item. Okay. So in terms of takeaways, I have, John's going to give us that list. He already has
Add
it.
it if you want.
You can just send it in the drive, you can send it to Jennifer. So we'll look at the list. We are all going to think about what emergency costs are. I'm going to work on some language based upon what you all said in terms of the review of agreements, we'll share that. And then if the folks that are here representing finance and or county administrator or selects, then can get us a little bit more feedback on timing of payments and what would be helpful. If possible for our next meeting, great. We'll just keep it open. It's an open item. That's what I had for takeaways from all of us. We had some good discussion on capital costs, so I think maybe we can even look at. I'll put something between. We'll figure something out. We'll build something in the document in terms of the spirit of what we talked about with capital costs. And we still need to talk about that process too. But is that a good place to start? And we'll come back next time with leases. Next Monday. Next Monday, same time, same place.
Yeah.
Is that good? Fantastic. Well, with that, I would be looking for a motion to adjourn tonight. With that, administrators, I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn. Justin, you want to second that one?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you. We'll see you all next week. Very good work tonight. Thank you all.